Well, good day to you. It is May the 10th. I hope you're having a wonderful day wherever you happen to be and a good start to your weekend. My name is Gary Willing. I want to welcome you to this channel and also just let you know, if you want to know more about Maitreya and the Masters of Wisdom, that the best thing to do is to do your own research and to look into this and investigate it for yourself. If you check out some of the information on some of these websites that I've provided links for in the description portion of these videos, you can get some really good background information about Maitreya, about his priorities, about the many miracle signs, and those kind of things. But the link at the very top, the Share International link, takes you to the Share International webpage, and that's probably the best website to get the best background information from. Hopefully you'll check it out because it's free. You want to come back and join the discussion? Post a comment. Let me know what you think. If you have a question you want to want me to discuss in the next video, then ask your question by posting your question in the comment section, or you can email me that question to searchforscience@mail.com. And as promised, I will try to answer the question that came my way, and it's coming from a gentleman named James. And he says, Gary, it's James. I interviewed you twice. Any new news on Maitreya? Well, thank you for the question, James. I do remember being interviewed from you. There were two really good interviews. We talked a lot about what we talk about here, but in greater depth because you had some wonderful questions that you asked. And hopefully at some point we'll do a third interview, I guess. Now, in terms of any new news about Maitreya, from my perspective, no. To be honest, I don't have a connection with one of these masters as Benjamin Crème once did. And he was able to communicate telepathically back and forth between a master. He was in London and his master was in the Himalayas, and he was able to receive messages and be able to talk to his master really without any distortion. And he was trained quite a bit to be able to do that. And I know there are a lot of people that claim connection with these masters. They call them ascended masters, and they get all sorts of wonderful teachings from these masters, or if they're perhaps religious and very religious, well, then they're receiving messages from Jesus or God or whatever. But Benjamin Crème talked about his training. He didn't talk about what he did in his training because he wasn't allowed to do that, but he did talk about how extensive it was and how arduous it was and how many hours he had to put in each day to be able to do it. He was trained upwards of 20 hours a day by his master to be able to receive messages like this. It didn't just come to him. And there was a time where he thought he was receiving a message from one of his masters. This was early on. He thought he was receiving a message from this master that had communicated with him, and he was wrong. And he said he was sent on all these different errands. He sent himself on all these different errands, and they ended up not being real. But he was eventually able to learn from those mistakes and be trained by this master where he could receive messages quite a bit, and very, like I said, without distortion. So people that claim to be communicating from a higher source and not talk about their training, I would say is probably, for the most part, garbage, to be honest, but that's just me. But Alice Bailey also talked about her training with her master to be able to do what she did, to where she was able to receive messages from one of these masters, the master Dwalkul, and write it down in the way that she did and not have any distortion in it in that way and all that kind of stuff. But Ben was able to ask his master, questions like, has Maitreya given any interviews, and where? He never said what station it was on or who interviewed him so people could go look it up, or what name is Maitreya using and that kind of stuff. He would just say he gave an interview in, in the United States or in Russia or China or Mexico or Brazil, those kind of things. And he never said the date or the time or whatever like that. Or he would say, well, Maitreya was present at this march or that march. Somebody might ask, hey, were you, like one of them was the Occupy Wall Street marches. Did Maitreya attend any of those? And he said no. So for some reason, Maitreya wasn't at those marches. But by and large, marches all over the world, you would see Maitreya amongst the crowd of people as a familiar. He would look like an ordinary person. He wouldn't stand out in the crowd at all, but he would just be there as his voice, adding his voice to the voice of the group to march against this justice or for this cause or whatever like that. And then he would also talk about some of the other things that Maitreya was doing behind the scenes, while he was in London and those kind of things. And I don't have that kind of connection, so I'm not able to talk about it. But since you use the word news, I wanted to talk about some of the things that are going on in the news, okay? And how I think it relates to what's going on with this story and the coming back into the everyday world of these masters. How important it is that these masters come back into the world at this time. And also, how is Maitreya affecting all of us without us really knowing about it at this moment in time? Because if you look at what's going on in the world from what we know about this information, you can start to see it for yourself. A, it will give you a lot of hope for a lot of ways, but B, it will also help you give you a different perspective on why we're going through what we're going through. Because I think if you go back and even read some of Benjamin Creme's master's articles about what he was talking about in the future, we're starting to see it now, in terms of the voice of the people is what I'm really talking about. So if you look at the different areas that really the news is about, right? You got the religious, which is something we can talk about with the new pope, right? Political, economic, and then the social fields. There's a lot going on in those arenas. A lot is causing a concern, and it should cause concern. Others, we should look at it from a different perspective and perhaps give us a little bit of hope about what's going on. Because for the most part, what's going on, what's being said in the media and how it's being said it's not good, right? And like I said, we should be concerned, but at the same time, try to remember what Maitreya said. All will be well. All manner of things will be well. But all evidence to the contrary for sure. Now, in the social field, okay, there's been a lot of movements all around the world to march for a cause or against what they see as an injustice and those kind of things. And this has been, this is a relatively new phenomena. I don't think you can really go back much farther than maybe 120, 130 years, maybe 150 years, I guess, because there's nothing really written earlier than that where there were peaceful marches for change. All the revolutions were violent, right? Well, I mean, by and large, the women's suffrage movement here in the United States, for instance, was a peaceful revolution. By and large, for the most part, I'm not saying it was 100%, but by and large, the civil rights movement was a peaceful movement. So those are instances of the signs of the time, right? But more and more and more groups are coming together to march against what they see as an injustice or for this cause or that cause. And the thing that I think is quite extraordinary, that if you look at it from this perspective, where we're seeing these marches is just as important. Countries like Iran, China, Russia, places where you would have never seen this 25, 30 years ago. We're already starting to see the effects of the voice of the people. Again, remember what Maitreya says over and over again, over again. We are going to make the changes. He's just here to inspire and guide us, perhaps keep us from help us from making missteps and so forth and falling back into old patterns and those kind of things. But for the most part, humanity has to change the world, not these masters. They're just going to be here to teach us and guide us and help us as much as they can. That's why, really, if you go to one of these marches and Maitreya just happens to be in there, you wouldn't recognize him because he would be amongst the people. He wouldn't be standing up on a pulpit screaming at people and telling them what to do, He wouldn't organize these marches. It's for humanity to organize. He just happens to attend it, add his weight to the cause and those kind of things at that point. But the voice of the people is getting louder. And according to Maitreya, eventually it will get so strong and so focused and so powerful, the voice of the people, that governments won't be able to withstand the power of the people. They'll have to adhere to what the people want. The people are ahead of the governments of the world. We know what we need to do. We're just not implementing our will yet. Once we do, it will change everything. All the changes that Maitreya talks about, peace, the cleaning of the environment, will only come when the people themselves get together and make the changes. So, hopefully that gives you a little bit of hope. Now, the thing that I do think that humanity is missing when it comes to, let's say, peace and how important it is, and also the environment, which is another big concern on people's minds, right? We're missing the real cause of the problem. And that's the other reason why I think we're not getting things done. So for instance, people march for justice all over the world, right? Noble cause to be able to do that. But they're missing what really is the root cause of injustice, or the cure for injustice, I guess is a better way of saying it. And they're also, when they march for peace, they're not understanding that we can create peace and how to create peace, right? Maitreya says, without sharing, there will be no justice. Without justice, there will be no peace. And this is something to keep in mind as you go through the next few years. Without peace, there will be no future. Our world leaders all talk about the need for peace. This new Pope talked about it in his first talk, the need for peace. But no one is talking about the most important piece to that peace, the principle of sharing. What is the principle of sharing if you're new to this channel? You know, I have a link that talks about it. It doesn't talk about it in this way, but you can understand a little bit more of the historical, have a better historical understanding of what I'm talking about, but is the Marshall Plan. This is evidence of what Maitreya is saying is true. It will bring about trust amongst nations, and it's already happened once. Unfortunately, it did not happen all over the world, and it did not happen ongoingly. It only happened for about 4 years, but it did bring about trust amongst nations, this Marshall Plan. It happened right after World War II. Europe was decimated. It was destroyed. Governments were trying to rebuild their nations. They were trying to stabilize Europe and not have it fall back into another war. So the United States devised this genius plan called the Marshall Plan, where they gave excesses of resources to Europe. But that's not the only thing of it. You know, the United States has given aid all the time to other countries. But that aid is usually, we want something back from it, right? It's not given freely. So this was actually given freely to Europe to help rebuild Western Europe. But that's not the end of it. But wait, there's more. Europe, when it started to rebuild itself, started to create some excesses. And they gave back to the United States what they took. It was a lease-lend kind of deal. It totally transformed Europe. It rebuilt Europe quite rapidly. Rebuilt the infrastructure, but politically it stabilized Europe. But the other thing that it did that nobody talks about, it created trust amongst nations that typically distrusted one another. It created a goodwill amongst those nations, which from the master's point of view is the lowest aspect of love. It gave these countries goodwill that typically were at some point at war with one another. Countries like France, Germany, Italy, Spain, Britain, and the United States, the major players in this, were at some point at war with one another. Every single one of those nations had attacked one another in the past, right? I mean, even just right before the Marshall Plan, there was World War I and World War II, so they were at war with one another. Ask yourself this question. Have any of those nations attacked one another since this took place? Has Germany invaded France? Has Britain lobbed a missile toward the United States, or vice versa, right? It created trust amongst those nations. Now, here's the danger in the news, okay? So we have a world leader now that's totally ignorant of the laws of life, totally ignorant of how to bring about peace. Now, he's not unique in this regard. I think most world leaders are ignorant of the laws of life and ignorant of how to bring about peace. That's why nobody's talking about sharing. It won't be until humanity is taught this crucial point by Maitreya that we won't really talk about the need for sharing. But they all want peace. They all want security for themselves. They don't really care about other countries. They don't care about what goes on in other countries. They don't see the danger in giving arms to other countries to arm themselves in battle against other countries and so forth. But everything that has happened in the last 70 years-ish or so, every time our world leaders talk about peace and security, they never bring up sharing. They always talk about it in another way. Military buildup, right? Posturing here, posturing there, rattling this saber here, putting sanctions on that country there. Now it's tariffs, which is it's destabilizing economics, between countries, but it's also creating distrust and competition amongst countries that typically weren't really that competitive with one another. They were competitive to a point, but they weren't super competitive. Where is this going to lead us? If we do not change course, very soon this could bring about more conflict, geopolitical conflict and so forth. It's divisive in that way. And that's why I would say that if you were looking at the world as a whole with the geopolitical thing that's going on with Trump slapping tariffs on everybody, that it could destabilize it enough to where we do break out into another war. Will it? Hopefully not. But at this point, anything can happen. Because it's the exact opposite of the principle of sharing. And it's very easy to see that it's the forces of evil that are doing this, because all that the forces of evil do that make what they do evil is they hold humanity back. They try to push it back into the past. We were moving forward toward goodwill, and then this happened. And we've taken a huge step back. We've gone closer to the edge and those kind of things. So the point is to, if you want to do some research, look into the Marshall Plan and how it brought about peace. Ask yourself, has anything that any president in the United States has said or any British prime minister has said since World War II brought about peace and security? It hasn't. But ask yourself that question, inquire about it, look into it. Do your own investigation, look into the Marshall Plan. Did those countries really participate in a thing called the Marshall Plan? Did it really exist? Look into it, investigate it for yourself, see if it's true for you. And then ask yourself, amongst those people, up until a few months ago, especially, those nations trusted one another better than they trusted any other nations on the planet. And then I always say, take it a step further. Ask yourself this question. It doesn't cost you anything to ask questions to yourself, right? It doesn't make you look bad if you come up with the wrong answer. But just ask yourself this question. Had the United States tried the Marshall Plan with every country in the world, and had it never ended, what kind of world would we be living in? Just something to think about. But this principle of sharing is not a country giving aid to another country with the expectation of getting something back from that country. It's freely giving excesses that they have, just sitting there wasting, doing nothing, giving it to a country, and then that country eventually paying it back in some way, shape, or form with an excess that they have. That's the principle of sharing. It will bring about trust, just as Maitreya said. It will bring about goodwill amongst nations that participate in it. And then eventually it will bring about justice. All wars will stop. All terrorism will stop. There won't be these geopolitical debates and fights between countries and so forth. It will stabilize the world economically and politically. Crime will start to go down. Drug trafficking will go down. This is all the promises of what the principle of sharing will eventually do. And it will eventually bring about manifested love on this planet. That's the truth. And it will give us a future. It's the only way it's going to give us a future. So looking at what's going on and that problem of the world, perhaps this perspective might be a little different, give you a little different perspective on things. The other thing, too, about the environment, it's important that nations trust one another in order to solve the environmental problem. And they won't be able to trust one another until they try the principle of sharing, until there's goodwill amongst nations in that way. Geopolitical battles between countries over tariffs or non-tariffs is keeping us from solving the environmental problem, for sure, right? And that's why it's going to be put off a little longer, unfortunately. Now, the other thing, too, that, people marching for social justice, they also march for ecological justice and for the environment and that kind of thing. They're missing the point, too. And this is perhaps giving you a different perspective. I'm not expecting you to believe this, but I'm just hoping that you'll at least look into it for yourself. Now, what is the big debate, when people talk about the environment? It is climate change. Started out as global warming 25, 30 years ago. Then there was they started to notice that the environment was necessarily always heating up. There was extreme colds in different areas that were caused by this pollution and those kind of things. So they tried to reframe it to climate change to get their point across. I think it was a mistake for the progressives to use that, because now they're kind of stuck with it. And it also gave ammunition for the other side to claim that there's no reality to that. Now, both sides have vested interests into why they're doing and saying what they're doing and not doing anything with it. I think this is a part of the political referendum that needs to be looked at and taken care of, because politicians on the right and the left are both getting money from sources that have no desire to change anything economic or ecologically, because they're making too much money off of it. The oil companies around the world, for instance, and those kind of things. But both sides of the aisle have gotten the situation about the environment right, and both sides have gotten it wrong. So what do I mean? Well, climate change is serious. It's not the most serious problem that we're facing environmentally, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But the left say that climate change is man-made, which they are right. It's actually is being exacerbated by the activity of man, right? And what we do, and our factories and the cars that we drive and those kind of things. The right that deny climate change, saying that it's all natural, are also right, because it is there's a natural reason why the temperature is increasing in the environment. But it's the proportion. They just see it's either black or white. They don't see that it could be a proportion between the two. So the masters will say that it's 80% man-made, which is serious, 20% natural causes. And if we just looked at it like that, we could start to solve the problem a little bit differently and perhaps tackle it in that way. But again, trust is going to be the most important thing between nations to be able to solve the environmental problem. And the only way to bring about trust, the principle of sharing. Now, the thing that they're missing, and nobody's talking about this, I've never heard a scientist talk about it, it's what's the masters refer to as the invisible peril. And that invisible peril is nuclear radiation. How we store it, how we process it, how we get rid of it is very, very dangerous, highly unstable, and is what's killing humanity off. Okay, so the scientific ideology that's not 100% true, and that is that the physical universe they see is really made up of what? Solid, liquid, and gas, and that's it. That's the ideological view from our scientists. But that's not the whole picture. There are actually 4 levels of physicality above gas. The masters refer to them as the etheric. Now, you want historical references to this, so I'm giving you something to look up if you want to do that. And if you look up Wilhelm Reich, he was a psychoanalyst, but he was also a part-time scientist. He discovered what he referred to as the orgone. The orgone is a level above gas that he scientifically proved. The masters say that orgone is not one plane of existence, but 4 planes of existence. Now, why is this important in terms of radiation? Well, the scientific ideology is that there is no problem with how we store, process, and get rid of nuclear, our nuclear way of doing things, is because when they put a Geiger counter up to a container or up to a silo or whatever, reactor, there is nothing registering on the Geiger counter. Well, the Geiger counter technology is from the 40s, I guess, or maybe 30. I don't know when it was exactly invented. It's been a long time. And it's very crude. And it only measures up to gas. Well, there's 4 levels of physicality, according to the masters, above gas, this etheric. That's where that radiation is affecting everything on this planet. We can't see it. We can't taste it. We can't smell it. Nothing. But so we don't think that it's there. If we can't see it, feel it, or taste it, well, then it must not be there. Everything must be okay. Well, that's not true. It's an illusion. The illusion is that, and the reality is that radiation is what's killing humanity off. It's killing all the animals off. It's what's destroying the oceans and the coral reefs, and also what is killing the bees, and what's killing our plants. And if we don't do something about it, we're all going to die. And so the good news is that we have help to help sustain us until we learn not to do this. We're not going to die from our environment, but we have to stop hurting it and harming it in the way that we do. And the help that we're getting is from other planets. Humanity from Mars and from Venus and from Saturn and Jupiter in the main. But they come here in their spaceships and they clean up our atmospheres. Why don't we see them? Well, guess what? They are living on those 4 levels of physicality, known as the etheric. But they're cleaning up our atmosphere all the time. And that's the only reason why we're able to live in this planet right now. If it wasn't for them, we would be dead, according to the masters. So humanity has to learn that it's pollution that's the problem, not global warming, and not so much the invisible peril. It's pollution as a whole. We're polluting the environment, and it's what's making everybody sick. The masters will say that some diseases like Alzheimer's, scientists are trying to cure Alzheimer's in all sorts of ways. They look at it as genetic, right? Just the physical brain. Well, according to these masters that I speak of from time to time, Alzheimer's is caused by radiation. It's what's shrinking our brains. I read an article online, and there was a 17-year-old that was just diagnosed with Alzheimer's. A 17-year-old. Now, I do think Alzheimer's exists in terms of old age, and is maybe not necessarily caused by radiation, but somebody that gets Alzheimer's at 17, that's caused by radiation. And so we have to stop, polluting the environment that we're doing, and it will eventually, the environment will heal itself. We don't really have to cure the environment to solve the problem. We just have to stop doing what we're doing, and then the environment will heal itself, I think will probably be the advice that is advocated by these masters. Now, the other thing I wanted to say is religiously, right? There's been this, religious event that happened over the last week, right? The Catholics just elected a new pope. Pope Leo the 14th. It's all over the news. He became very famous almost nearly overnight. And the only pundit that I knew that was talking about him being a potential pope was actually Steve Bannon, of all people. He's the only one that talked about him. Everybody else, I don't know anybody else that was talking about him as a potential pope. But he was kind of, like I said, he was kind of a dark horse, and he just kind of came out of nowhere, and bam, he's the pope. What does it mean for humanity about this pope? Well, I do think it's significant. Even if you're not Catholic, it is significant because it is a huge group of people, over 1 billion Catholics all around the world, that this pope will influence, for good or bad. And I was of the opinion that the Pope after Francis would be the exact opposite of Francis. And I don't know if this person will eventually be the exact opposite of Francis. I think from what I've been reading and seeing on the news and so forth, he looks like he'll be more of a centrist than Francis was. But I was very much of a fan of Francis because he was a progressive. He wanted to see some changes. He was a little bit more open and tolerant of other people that perhaps most religious people aren't. And I think he was an example of how to be and how to live and how to love people that you disagree with and those kind of things. He seemed very open. Hopefully this Pope will be as open as him in that way. I don't know. Time will tell. But I do want to end the discussion with something that I've been wanting to talk about for a while, and that is something that one of these masters wrote in one of these books when it comes to experiences and what we see in life and perhaps even our world leaders. It is important to have a healthy skepticism, not to be afraid of what we see, not to experience fear and to buy into that fear, not to go around spreading fear and those kind of things, but to have a healthy skepticism, to be able to look at a world leader and go, is what you're saying true, right? Is it not true? And to do some investigation and look into it, right? If you remember back 30 minutes ago when I started the video, what was one thing that I suggested that everybody do? To do your own research and investigate this. Don't take my word for it, right? Because it's important to have a healthy skepticism. It's important to have a healthy skepticism about even what I'm talking about. When you see Maitreya on TV and you think that it might be Maitreya, it's important to have a healthy skepticism. Don't be skeptical outright where you just are closed to what he has to say, but, look at it. Investigate it for yourself. I think it's important. It's also important to look at this in the way that we view the world. Not every thought that we all have is something that we should really be looking at. Not every belief that we have in the world and in ourselves and in God is real. It's important to have a healthy skepticism. So that's my little bit of a suggestion. I tried to record this video and talk about some of the things that I've been seeing on the news based on what James had asked about the news. It was a part of his question. But I do think that all the things that we're seeing, the good and the bad, the uncomfortable and the comfortable, the what we think is beneficial and what we don't think is beneficial, are all a part of what we just talked about in this video. About the effects of Maitreya on humanity, on the thoughts and hearts of humanity, which he's having a profound effect, whether we see it light way or not, he is. Also, looking at some of the different spheres, economic, political, social, religious spheres, some of the changes that we're seeing even over the last week, and how rapid these changes are all happening in the world is crazy. Even with AI, this is all a part of the future, AI, automation, making humanity's life easier so that we can do what we're here to do, to be creative, to be joyful, loving beings, not to be worker bees, but to be creative beings. And then also looking at life a tad bit more skeptically, to not just take on face value what we think and what we see as real. And I think Ben's a great example of it. When he was being trained by his master, how he thought something was real and it wasn't. And how it took training from his master to be able to do this. We don't have to be trained by a master to be able to do it. We can do it within ourselves. What did the Buddha say? Have your own light be the light to light your way, or something like that. I mean, it's true. Use the light within yourself to be that guide for you. But I think we have to be skeptical of what's coming our way, even in our own thoughts and minds, and kind of see, is it real? Is it not? Hopefully that makes sense. I love you guys. Thank you very much for your question, James, and I look forward to talking to you guys again, at least by next weekend. Have a wonderful day. Remember to take action and help SOP save our planet. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to talking to you again in future videos.